Welcome to another episode of The Evaluation Couch, the podcast where we talk about career growth and the field of evaluation. This is your host, Maria Montenegro. The first thing I need to do in this episode is set the record straight. A few days ago, my sister was listening to one of my podcast episodes. I think it was the cover letter one. She was in the car with her kids, and the episode ended, so it automatically went into my introduction episode where I talk about the evaluation couch and why I started this space. Somewhere along that introductory episode, I say that when I learned about program evaluation, it was like love at first sight. And my nephew, who is 10 years old, was very upset about me saying this because he thinks I should provide a more accurate picture about my love life. He thinks the first time that I experienced love at first sight was my first dog, Safi, who actually came into my life before I encountered this field of program evaluation. So he wanted to talk to me after he heard the episode and ask me why I had said that. I offered that I would set the record straight with my listeners and with him, and also for my little niece, Maya. So now that you all know that the first time I experienced love at first sight was with my dog, Safi, who's just about to turn 10 years old in a few weeks, we can move on. And it's actually great to start this episode with that little bit of more of a personal story, because in this episode, I'm going to walk you through my experiences applying for jobs that I need to heal from. I didn't intend for this episode to be about negotiating, but when I was going back through all of the job application processes that I have experienced that haven't been great, that have caused me some sort of hurt, that maybe I haven't let go 100% yet, I realized that they had this common thread around negotiation. I also know that negotiation is a topic that is important for many people, especially for women. In preparing for this episode, I looked at some statistics around comfort with negotiation, how prevalent discomfort among women versus men is, and I found some of the statistics amazing in a negative way. There is a particular book called Women Don't Ask: Negotiation and the Gender Divide. I'm adding the link in the notes of this episode. And this book has incredible statistics about the difference between men and women in feeling comfortable negotiating. Both of the authors have worked a lot on negotiation, on gender issues. And I'm just going to share a few of the numbers to set the stage. 2.5 times more women than men said that they feel a great deal of apprehension about negotiating. So it's not only about how often women negotiate, how successful they are, but it even starts with how we feel about negotiating. As a result of this apprehension, men initiate negotiations about 4 times more than women. One thing I found very interesting that they share in this book is that when people were asked about metaphors associated with the process of negotiation, women share things like going to the dentist, while men provided metaphors around competitive sports. So quite different experiences. And what is pretty incredible is the cost of not negotiating. The book estimates that by not negotiating your first salary, an individual can lose more than $500,000 by age 60. Other research that I found that was very interesting and not very optimistic has shown that even when women do negotiate, we have lower goals and we have less expectations of what we're actually going to get. This actually translates into what we ask in negotiations, which leads to lower outcomes. Women that negotiate earn 30% less than their male counterparts. And this is often just because we ask for less. And lastly, there was another study that I found extremely interesting and very linked to my experiences. And it was a study that looked at when women underperform men in negotiation processes. They found that the only instance in which women underperform men in negotiation outcomes was when women were more assertive, when they came in with a stronger stance, with more boldness, asking for their value. They concluded that when women show up more assertively, they also experience backlash, and this backlash can sometimes result in lower or negative outcomes. I like that this study talks a lot about the unconscious biases that play a role in hiring decisions when the negotiation is taking place. A more recent research from Vanderbilt Business is actually showing that women do ask and are improving how often they negotiate salaries when they accept a job. But they're still finding that the gender gap has widened, which again brings up the question of what else is going on there. Is it the conscious bias? Is it the gender norms and stereotypes that are assigned to women when they are having these negotiation discussions? Of course, we know that depending on the identities, in addition to being a woman, that you bring into the table, your experience negotiating can be quite different and potentially worse. You will see as I share a few stories of job application processes that I've gone through that I have experienced this myself in my career. I'm going to share what my experience was, what I was thinking and feeling in that moment, and I'm also going to share the lessons that I've learned. I hope that if you have experienced or are experiencing a challenging situation similar to mine, I hope that my stories remind you that you're not alone, that more often than not, you are not the problem. I also want to acknowledge negative experiences with regards to the negotiation. They similar to topics around salary, compensation, and money, have some weight and are somewhat of a taboo. When I was journaling in preparation for this episode, I realized that I haven't really discussed these experiences with many people. Sometimes I've been embarrassed to share that these things have happened to me. This episode helped me remember that these experiences do not reflect something negative about me. They don't reflect me as a greedy person, as a person who doesn't have skills and who isn't able to ask for what she deserves. Seeing the statistics that I just shared with you helped me feel validated. And that's what I'm hoping to do with this episode. If you have had any similar experiences, I hope that hearing this, you feel understood, you feel like you're not alone, and that hearing some of my reflections and the lessons that I've learned are also motivators for you to reassess those experiences and the stories that you're telling yourself from those experiences, and see if perhaps there's anything that you can change that would serve you better. So I'm going to take you back to the first job that I had related to research and evaluation, where I learned about evaluation. This was in a public sector education institution where I was employed for 2 years. I was very happy in this job. I enjoyed it. I ended up leaving because I wanted to focus more on evaluation full time rather than it being one part of my job. I had a few active projects and a great relationship with my team and supervisors. So when I left, they kept me on a casual contract. Now, a few months before I left, I had recommended a classmate from my master's program for casual employment. So this person was hired to do the exact same thing that I was going to be hired to do on a casual basis, with the difference that he had been hired just a few months before I left. I had been in the organization for 2 years. I knew it in and out. I had performed very highly. When I was negotiating my casual contract, I reached out to my previous classmate and asked how much he was getting paid. It was uncomfortable. I had to do a lot of work leading up to actually going in and asking, but I'm extremely glad that I did. I framed it as something like, hey, I'm about to change my contract into a casual because I'm taking another position and I'm working on the negotiation. Would you mind sharing how much you're making? So they provided their amount per hour. And when I received my casual contract, the amount that I was receiving was significantly less. So I ask questions like, why am I receiving less if I've been in the organization for 2 years? I know the organization in and out. There's going to be no onboarding required. I also have this exact same competencies at that point. Like we had just graduated, so we had the same training, same years of experience, very comparable. After digging more and asking more questions, I found out that the human resources person that hired me had been let go because they were consistently giving lower salary offers to women. And on the one hand, having confirmation and hearing from my supervisor at the moment, an acknowledgement of you were mistreated, you had been in this organization for 2 years, and this is what happened. They were let go, so there was action taken. That felt validating. On the other hand, knowing that I had been there for 2 years, that I had performed very highly, and this whole time I was making less than I would have if I had been a man, that was really harsh. That really hurt. And of course, there was only so much they could do about my casual salary because I had already been hired. There was only so much they could increase my salary. It was a policy of the organization. I was left in a situation where if I had wanted to continue working as a casual, I was going to consistently be making less than a male counterpart that I had even recommended and had the exact same skills I had. The interesting thing about that story is that I had negotiated my salary. They had increased the salary offer a little bit. But after this experience, I think the story that I stayed with was that my efforts were not enough. Regardless of the preparation and my attempts and following all of the tips around negotiating, it was not enough because I was a woman. And that was kind of my takeaway from that. When I moved on to new employment, it was in a situation where I chose to accept a pay cut to work in a position where I was actually going to be able to work in evaluation and become an evaluator. Of course, at that time, making the decision of accepting a pay cut, moving to a more expensive city, all of the noise around what my friends, my family had to say about the fact that I was taking a pay cut, that was an interesting and challenging thing to navigate. When I was given an offer, of course, I negotiated. I shared with the organization that I was going to be taking a pay cut. I did get a slight increase in my salary. And when I started in that position, again, created a community and slowly over time started talking about salaries with transparency with my colleagues. And in that sharing of transparency, I identified inequities, especially among performance and compensation. I also encountered a staff member that actually was amazed when they heard we had negotiated our salaries because they didn't. They were offered the very lowest bottom of the salary range, and that's what they were being paid. In this position, what was most challenging for me when it comes to negotiating was trying to negotiate for a fair acknowledgement of my performance and my value based on my accomplishments in the first year of my employment. I built this story about evaluation consulting organizations of all sizes, large and small, being a bit exploitative in terms of compensation to their staff, especially when you're starting early in your career. The reason why I find that interesting, even though it is expected that when you're in an entry-level position, you're going to be making less money, but I'm talking about compensating at a lower rate than the market value for those skills and that the experience that people are coming into your organization. The reason why I think that's very interesting and why it matters a lot to me is that when you start in your early years at a lower level in your market value, it will impact your long-term compensation and wealth. There's many studies that prove this. It also impacts your own perception of your own value. And I think the lesson that I learned from this experience specifically was it wasn't so much about the pay cut. I was okay with the pay cut, and especially because of how challenging it was for me to hear comments from people that I really cared about with a lot of judgment around the idea of accepting a pay cut. It is not something that I would want to perpetuate. My view on pay cuts is if you are accepting a position that is more aligned with your career goals. And your career goals could include improving your well being and your happiness at work, transitioning into a different sector, or whatever it is. I think it's a very personal decision whether to accept a pay cut or not. The lesson that I learned from this experience was that it is a sacrifice to accept a pay cut. So when you are accepting a pay cut, the salary that you're coming into an organization is going to dictate your growth. Many organizations have a cap, a percentage cap on salary increases on an annual basis. If this is the case, you need to be comfortable with the amount that you're coming in order to be satisfied and feel valued long term in that organization. So the lesson I learned there is it's not only about the starting salary, it's about compensation progression opportunities and whether the organization has transparent and fair compensation practices. After that experience, I moved into my current employer, and I'm not going in chronological order. I've had other jobs, other interviews in between, but I'm sharing the more significant ones related to this topic. After that, I had a hiring process that was perhaps the most harmful I have experienced. It was with a consulting organization that works in evaluation. It was an organization that I was interested in, that I looked up to. So I applied for a position there, interviewed, and was offered the position. I was offered the position. I actually had the letter in my email and they were waiting for me to sign it. It was going to be a great story, but it wasn't. The position offered me a lower salary than what I was currently having. For a little bit more of context, I was not in a position where I was seeking another opportunity. I had heard about this organization in the past, liked the work that they did. I saw an opportunity and I was like, why not? Let's apply. In the position I was at the moment, I had a higher salary. So this would have meant, again, taking a pay cut for a similar organization. And I was at a different point in which I just didn't want to do that. And I especially didn't want to do that without being very sure that I wasn't going to get myself into a similar situation. Meaning, I wanted to make sure that I was being fairly compensated, that the organization had clear pathways for growth, and that they had transparency around their decision making. So we entered the negotiation process. And by the way, I'm just going to share this out there because I have heard of people that didn't know that you can negotiate offers. You should 100% always negotiate offers. I don't think there's any situation in which I would suggest you not to negotiate. By asking, you wouldn't lose anything, in theory, because there goes my story. So I received a letter. We start negotiation conversations about the salary. I think I received a $2,000 increase or something like that. When this offer happened, in the place where I was employed, they had already offered to cover two things: my credential designation for evaluation, which has a cost, as well as for me to attend a conference. Both things that I really wanted to do. So those two things I wanted to negotiate because otherwise I would have had to pay them out of pocket. And in addition, before accepting the position, I wanted to make sure that the organization had good practices, that they actually had a process for making decisions around progression. Now, I'm also going to add, this is not a small consulting organization, so it wouldn't have been unrealistic to expect that they do have these processes in place. At the moment, I was also in the Eval Youth Mentorship Program. So I was constantly meeting with my mentor, talking about my career. And I had mentioned that I had this interview coming up. And she had shared a resource with me that unfortunately is no longer available. It was a training workbook for women around negotiating your salary. And it broke all the steps. It provided examples. It provided scripts. It was such a great resource. I'm very sad that it is no longer available online. But my great mentor had shared this with me, And I was like, of course, right? I've had these bad experiences negotiating. So I'm going to put in the effort and I'm going to change the outcome. I did all of the training, followed all of the rules in the conversations and the negotiation process. One day I woke up and I found an email saying that they had decided to resign the offer, which means basically they said, no, just kidding. Actually, we do not want to hire you. Now I want just to like take you back to the beginning. I had already received the offer. They were just waiting for me to sign it. I didn't even know this was possible. To be honest, whenever I've discussed things like negotiating salaries and so on, I think that the context is always like, oh, nothing bad is going to happen. Once they provide the offer, they want you to work there. There could be no harm as long as you're respectful, as long as you're professional, as long as you continue to show your value. Like, what could go wrong? Then I had this experience where I did a training, followed all the steps, was professional, and had the worst outcome. If you haven't had an offer rescinded before, then I don't think you could understand what it feels like to have that taken away from you. The amount of shame and questioning that I think just unavoidably comes with that realization that they literally have removed that from the table. Unfortunately, they didn't really give me a lot of explanations. What they said on that email was that they don't think the position is a good match for my expectations and my career growth expectations. And that was it. That was the last we ever had any connection with that organization. And I think that experience has been the hardest. There was definitely a lot of storytelling and shame that I felt from that. I don't think I have shared this experience with a lot of people, but it definitely felt like it must be me. I had done all of this preparation. I had followed these steps. And even after all of these efforts, I just had this horrible outcome. I was wondering if I was being too greedy, if I was being unreasonable and my skills were actually not worth what I was asking, if I even deserved asking for the things that I wanted. The positive thing of this story is that I was employed and in a position that I actually enjoyed. So recovering from that wasn't as difficult as it would have been had I not had an alternative, had this been my dream job. So I'm grateful for that. But I do want to admit that it was challenging. When I look back at this experience now, especially after preparing for this episode, after having discussions with so many other women facing similar challenges, I have to be honest that preparing for this episode has helped me unpack and heal from this experience. Even though it has been several years since this happened, I think this has still been on the back of my head, especially when I've had instances where negotiation has been required. But the episode has really helped me frame this experience in terms of the ingrained bias against women being assertive. And in reflecting in that previous experience I had where I didn't feel properly compensated for my performance, even after joining an organization, I see so many parallels between those two organizations, so many similarities around how they work, the type of organization, the culture, that I am able to look back at that experience and be grateful that I think I avoided repeating a similar story. I'm never going to know what would have happened if I had actually accepted that offer, if I had put my head down, accepted that offer, missed out on those opportunities, or paid for those professional development opportunities out of pocket. And maybe I would be in a better position. I don't know. But what I do know and what I can center myself on was that I did what I could. I looked for resources, I asked for help, I followed the steps, and I asked for what I needed to feel valued in that position. I think that's enough. I think that works. Not everyone is everyone's cup of tea, and that applies for job seekers and organizations as well. And moving on, I wish that was the end. I wish I could just wrap up the episode and say that was it. And now everything has been uphill from there, but it's not true. The next experience I had was hurtful in a bit of a different way. This was an experience where I applied for an organization that I really, really wanted to work in. This is an organization that has principles very aligned to my principles, that does work in areas where I want to work in the future, very aligned with where I hope my career goes in the long term. I had applied for a job in this organization. After going through the interviews and having great conversations with the team, they said they were going to provide the opportunity for an internal promotion and career advancement for someone within their team. They said they were really interested in keeping in touch with me. They really liked me. And I said, of course, I'm totally interested. About a year later, the hiring manager reached out and said, hey, we have another manager position opening. We really want you to apply. So I applied. I did all the work. I did the preparation. I went into the interview, did a great job. And they're like, yes, we want to hire you. We're so excited. This was a position that I would have loved to be able to accept. Now, the job position did have the salary in the job description, which hadn't been the case in any of my previous examples. And the salary that was provided was lower than what I was currently making at that point. And I knew that, but I am moving along in the world with the mantra that if I don't ask, then I won't know if things are negotiable or not. So we start the negotiation conversation, and I share that I would need to take a pay cut. This amount is below what I'm currently making. And I was ghosted. Again, I used the recommended steps. I was professional. I showed my enthusiasm. I followed up. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, but I was just ghosted, and they absolutely never followed up again. I've never heard of them again. And this experience hurt. It also hurt because I felt like we had built a relationship. I had just asked the question about the salary. It seemed a bit too much that they completely changed their attitude towards this. What I found interesting about this organization was that this is an organization that is very feminist, and integrity is a very important value for me. It is very important to be in organizations that have integrity, which means they do what they preach. If you're a feminist organization, you have feminist policies. And especially with all of this context that I brought into this experience of being compensated less because I was a woman, and having these reactions towards being assertive in negotiation processes, etc., I found it interesting how they approached the engagement. Nonetheless, it happened, and I don't have any hard feelings towards them. I don't think I really built a story out of this experience. Sometimes it is challenging for me to not think about the what ifs. What if I had accepted the position, even with the pay cut? Would I be closer to my long-term career goal and that place where I really want to be? I will never know. When I am feeling this, because of course there's doubt and there's guilt and there's regret, and none of those things are valuable. None of those things in that form, in that state, are things that you can work with. When I do have these thoughts, I challenge them and I try to see how I can reframe the situation. What is the other side of the story that I'm not focusing on? To provide a little bit of context, had I accepted that position, I would have accepted a pay cut of over 20%, which is a lot, especially compounded over years. So how I'm able to look at this experience and my decision, the actions that I took that led to them ghosting me, is that thanks to that decision, I've been able to stay in my positions. And beside of all of the benefits of my current position, what I have accomplished, the skills that I have developed, the impact that I've had, just focusing on the financial aspect is not the whole story, but it is an important one. That decision has allowed me to contribute towards my financial goals to the point where today I can make decisions that are not solely based on money. I am in a position where I can consider investing in my professional development, where I can consider investing to go back to school, where I can consider to invest to travel and take time off. And that is not a position that I would be able to be at had I made a different decision. Just financially, the numbers wouldn't have added up. Okay, that was a lot. I don't know if it's normal for people in this stage of their careers to have all of these stories. I'm very curious about that. So if you can relate and this has happened to you as well, please reach out so I don't feel like I'm the only one. But it's true. All of these stories have happened to me, and I know that they happen to others. I don't know if so many of them. I know that others, regardless of their identity, have experienced this to some extent or another. And that is why I wanted to just share my experiences and put it all out there. Now, you would think that because of all these bad experiences, whenever I hear the word negotiation, I imagine myself going into my dentist and getting these awful treatments, but I actually don't. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I feel insecure about my skills, my ability to more often than not get fair compensation, not be successful in the negotiating table. But I have one example that I can really ground myself in when it has worked and when I have managed. If you are facing something similar, if you've had a track record of trying something and not achieving it, or of trying to use a skill and not seeing the outcome that you've desired, maybe you can try to do what I do. I have one experience that I am very proud of that showcases that I am able to ask for what I deserve and I am able to get it. I was working in an organization for a few years. I had decided to apply for a job in a very similar organization. It was also an evaluation role. It was similar type of position, similar level of position that I was employed at. I applied, went through the interview, received an offer, and the salary was higher than what I was currently receiving. I wasn't sure if I wanted to accept the position, although it was higher. There are other factors that you and all of us should consider when we are assessing job applications. And I really did like my employment. Receiving this offer was a validation of my current market value. Sometimes when you come into an organization and you've been there for a few years, you kind of fall behind because organizations have a policy around how much they can increase your salary year over year. And it can lead to you being below the current labor market. So with this offer, I went to my supervisor and I said, I really like being in this position. I want to continue, but I received an offer and it is higher. What can we do about this? I was successful and they matched the offer with me staying in the same position, same contract. They escalated this request to a person really high in the organization and they matched the salary offer. It was great. And everything compounds when you're talking about salaries. So that salary increase meant that on my annual performance, that is capped at, let's assume it's 5%, the increase that I received was so much higher because my salary had increased. So that is my one piece of evidence that I can use to challenge any negative stories I have about my ability to negotiate. And yeah, it feels good to remember. It feels good to say it out loud. Sometimes we need to do that for ourselves. We need to be our number one cheerleaders and we need to be our number one pep talkers. So before I close off this episode, I just want to share 3 concluding thoughts on this very heavy topic of negotiating, being a woman, being judged, being heard in job application processes. The first one is you should always negotiate. Not only your salary, there's other things that you can negotiate. You can negotiate perks, vacation time, benefits, working from home arrangements. But whatever it is, organizations will always give you a lower offer than what they're actually willing to provide. So never hesitate, always negotiate. The second thing is also do have to be realistic about the compensation within the industry or field that we work in. In my case, in the field of evaluation, a lot of our jobs are in the public sector, in nonprofit organizations, and compensation is not that high, and growth opportunities are limited in many organizations. So when you are negotiating, doing that research to really understand your market value, the industry is very important so that you're making realistic asks. And then the last seed that I want to plant that has been helpful for me looking back at these experiences to not have regrets, to really appreciate where I am and the decisions I've made, is to think about the opportunity cost of your money. I think it's helpful to think about the opportunity cost of not having money today. The opportunity cost is that today, with that money, you can fund yourself that professional development opportunity that would maybe lead to a promotion and then to more salary growth. Or today, that decision you make around your finances could allow you to invest and save and for your money to grow for several years so that you are in a better position to make decisions not focused on money at a later point. What is the opportunity cost of my decisions? Am I accepting a job because it has a higher salary, but it's going to have a huge impact on my mental health? What is the cost of that? All of those are complicated questions, but questions nonetheless that we should be asking when we make big decisions around our career. If you found this episode helpful, if this story resonated with you, if it helped you in any way, I love hearing your messages and your experiences with the podcast. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn.